What's going on, guys? Blake Hawthorn, it's his turf, and tonight we are finally pouring some concrete. All right, guys, welcome to Friday Night Hardscapes. In tonight's video, we're gonna be jumping into our concrete and the pouring process. All right, guys, so in last week's video, we were compacting our base, getting our form set, laying in the rebar. If you're trying to pour concrete, whether you're actually pumping it or if you're tailgating it, I like to use this 2-inch pump line mix. So that's something you can just ask your concrete plant for. If for some reason they can't get that for you, reach out to me. I'll get you the complete breakdown on the specs of everything that's in our mix. So once we have our mix determined, the next thing we have to know is how many yards we're gonna be pouring. So if you figure up your square footage at a base of 4 inches thick, then you know that 1 yard is gonna cover roughly 75 to 80 square feet. I recommend just go ahead and figure it at 75 square feet. If you have a little bit extra, that's a good thing. You don't wanna run short. There's also some concrete calculator apps that you can get on, or websites. That's definitely a good tool. Or if you call your local plant, you tell them your length, your width, and your depth, they should tell you how much concrete you need. After you know your type of mix and your yardage, you want to give them the slump. Anytime that we are going to be pouring this or pumping this out, I typically want to order this out at a 5 to a 5.5 inch slump. Whenever it gets out to our job site, I recommend that you allow the pump operator to get the concrete to the slump that he sees best fit for moving that material, depending on what size his line is and how many feet he's going to be pumping it from his truck to where your patio space is. One last thing to keep in mind is whether it's hot or cold outside is if you want to add calcium or retardant in it. When it's hot outside, typically if it is above 75 degrees, we're gonna add a 1% retardant in there. If it is up above 85 degrees, we are going to add a 2% retardant in there. This is like Delvo, anything that's going to slow down the curing process of the concrete. It's gonna be buying you time. In the winter, when it's extremely cold, you may want to add calcium just to help speed up the concrete curing process. If not, you could be out there till 10, 11, 12, 1 in the morning. We've done it. It's not fun, but you do what you have to do to make sure your project gets finished. Okay, guys, so once our mix is all figured out, we know exactly everything that's going in it, you need to determine whether or not you're gonna be putting color in there. I recommend anytime you're doing a stamped concrete that you add an integral color. We use Chaotic Pigments integral color, and we will add, typically they have a color chart. I can show you guys. Boom, Justin, color chart, right there. Each of these pigments are 5 pounds per yard, depending on how dark of a pigment you want. So it'll start in the first row, which is 5 pounds, working all the way out to the 4th row, which is 20 pounds per yard of pigment to get the tone for the right color. Something you have to keep in mind is the yardage. So when you're bringing out these trucks in multiple pours, you really gotta do your math right so that all your pours will match at the end of the project. So once the concrete mix is done, the slump's right, the color's in it, we're ready to pour, you're gonna start pouring out the concrete. Using a line pump definitely makes these pours easy, allows us to be able to pump the concrete right where we need it, and then we can start to muck. So we use a tool called a come along to do the mucking, and this is just gonna be kind of like leveling it out. If you guys are in landscaping, getting into concrete, just picture yourself out there with topsoil, kind of getting it all level, getting it ready for sod. You know, that's what you're doing in this instance. You are just leveling out the concrete, getting as close to level as you can kind of see with the eye, and then that's when you'll grab your rod board or your easy screed, and you'll start to rod or screed out the mud. This is going to be getting it perfectly level, pulling off of your straight edges, or your 2 form boards, or the form and your drain, whatever it may be, whatever you have to start to screed that off. If you don't have something like an easy screed or a rod board, you can use just a really nice straight 2x4. Definitely make sure that you don't have a big bow in it, because if you do, you're gonna have a big bow in your concrete. So after your mud is screeded out, you're gonna start to float it in. So you'll use a bull float to float the bigger part of the slab, and you'll use a hand float to float in all of your edges. Sometimes on a really hot day, we will kind of mist it with water when we start to float it in. Something to keep in mind is if you add too much water, you are gonna mess with the pigment of the color in the concrete. Once everything's floated out, you'll grab your edger and put a nice edge around the slab. So it's easy if you put it up at an angle, and you kind of just work that in, kind of working that aggregate down, like maybe an inch at a time. Once you go maybe 2-3 feet, then you can flip the edge nice and smooth, keep from rolling it. You wanna make sure that your outside edge of your edger is level with the slab and not dipped in. Make sure that your inside edge is nice and smooth as well. After your initial edge is put in, that's when you will go in and float in your expansion joints. We like to insert expansion joints every 8 to 12 feet. Anytime that we exceed beyond that, concrete typically likes to crack. Remember, these control joints are just an encouragement for where you want the concrete to crack. It's not always going to crack where you install the control joints. I recommend that you will put a clause into your contract stating that concrete may crack somewhere besides your control joints and that you are not held liable for that. Also stating that this type of crack is only cosmetic and not structural. All right, so after the control joint is floated in, the next thing you're gonna do is you're going to use the Fresno. The Fresno is going to help slick up the slab and get it ready to be trialed. After the Fresno is put on there, you typically are going to have a waiting period, allowing that concrete to start to cure. In this time of waiting, you're gonna go back around, redo the edges, make them nice and clean, come back in, re-Fresno, and get ready to get out there on sliders and trial the concrete. On larger slabs, you're gonna use sliders so that you can get out in the middle of the slab and to hand trial it. We like to use a pull trowel or a rounded trowel when doing the final slick on the concrete. This takes out the sharp edges that some of your finished trowels will leave on the slab. Something to keep in mind is if your slab is partial sun, partial shade, the area in the sun is gonna start to set up faster. So this is the area that we will use the sliders on first, and then we will start the stamping process immediately after. This allows us to be able to stay on top of the stamping and not letting the concrete start to cure. As somebody is finishing out on sliders, the stamping team is coming right in behind them with the stamps. Before you start the stamping process, you will have to have a release. You can use a clear spray liquid release, or you can use a colored powder release. For this project, we used a clear liquid release. So we'll spray the entire slab and our stamps before we start stamping. When you're stamping, make sure that your stamps are nice and tight. Don't leave a gap, because if you do, you'll definitely see that separation in the finish of your concrete. Two things you want to keep on hand is going to be a texture skin and a detail roller. These allow you to really get the detail in those tight areas or areas that may not have taken a really good stamp. All right, guys, so once the concrete is stamped out, I like to let it cure a minimum of 48 hours, all the way up to as much as 2 weeks, if the project allows. And then what I'll do is we will come in and do a light rinse. In this instance, we had a clear sealer, so it was a very light rinse that we were able to do just to get all of the dirt and any kind of debris off of it. And then we will let it dry completely. Sometimes I'll speed this process up by using a leaf blower. And then we will add our sealer. When installing the sealer, I like to brush in all the edges and then to roll on the open flat work. I typically do 2 to 3 coats of sealer. On the second and third coat, I like to add Shark Bite. This is a non-slip additive that we add to the sealer. Just mix it up in the container and then roll it on. All right, guys, so this is the last step of the process. The last thing that I like to do is just let the customer know that the only thing that they'll have to do maintenance-wise to this patio is just to do a rinse and reseal every year. That way it stays looking as new and as beautiful as it is the day that we leave. Next week, we're gonna be jumping into our splash pad. I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for that video. We're gonna take an in-depth look to how simple installing one of these features in your next hardscapes can truly be. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Friday Night Hardscapes. I'll see you next week. God bless.
Jordan, move. No, left. Go left. Go left.
What do you have to say? I have an attitude problem. What do you have to say for yourself?
Hey, for real.